Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to the Department of Political Science Winter Quarter Faculty Panel. Thank you for attending. And we're going to start off with the officers of Pi Sigma Alpha doing the introductions to our panelists today.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lily. I'm the president of Pi Sigma Alpha, or PSA, the Political Science Honor Society here at UW. We are a club connected with the Poli-Sci department, and we regularly host weekly meetings to increase student engagement with the major and the department. Typically, we host guest speakers, professors, and regularly discuss current events. I do want to note, we welcome all interested students to attend. No need to be a PSA member or even a poli-sci major. So if anyone's interested in joining the discussion, we invite you all to come to a meeting anytime. Our executive board will be introducing our fantastic speakers today. So I'm going to hand it off to our vice president, who will introduce our faculty moderator. So Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Centeno. I am the vice president of Pi Sigma Alpha, and I will be introducing Chair John Wilkerson. Chair John Wilkerson is professor and director of the Center for American Politics. His research centers on legislative organization and decision-making, with related interests in public politics or health politics and comparative legislative studies. He is particularly interested about how information technologies can advance political science research and instructions. And I'll be passing it on to Nolan.
Hey everyone, my name is Nolan. I'm the treasurer of PSA, and I'll be introducing Professor Noah Smith. So Professor Noah Smith is a professor of machine learning in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. He is a computer scientist working at the junction of natural language processing, NLP, machine learning, ML, and computational social science. His research spans core problems in NLP, general purpose ML methods for NLP, methodology in NLP, and a wide range of applications. And I'll be passing it on to Declan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Declan, and I'm the Director of Communications for Pi Sigma Alpha, and I will be introducing Professor Victor Minaldo. Victor Minaldo is a professor of political science and is affiliated with the Center for Statistics and the Social Sciences, Near and Middle Eastern Studies, and the Center for Environmental Politics. He co-founded and co-leads the UW Political Economy Forum and specializes in comparative politics and political economy. And now I will be passing it off to Teresa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa, and I'm the Director of Campus Relations for Pi Sigma Alpha, and I am very happy to welcome Professor Eileen Caliskin as one of our panelists. Eileen Caliskin is an assistant professor at the University of Washington Information School and an adjunct assistant professor at the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. Caliskin studies the underpinning mechanisms of information transfer from human society to artificial intelligence. Specifically, Caliskin's research interests lie in AI ethics, AI bias, computer vision, natural language processing, and machine learning. So welcome.
Great, terrific. Thank you, Declan, Nolan, Lily, and Teresa for those fantastic introductions. And so now we're on to our panel. AI is, I'll do a little bit of introduction here and then we'll move to the panelists. AI has received a lot of attention of late, but it is hardly new, nor are disruptive technologies a new thing. Furthermore, technologies are usually not inherently good or bad. The example that comes to mind for me is ammonium nitrate, or synthetic fertilizer. Its invention 110 years ago has been transformative in terms of feeding the world, but it is also used in bomb building, and its overuse has contributed to significant environmental degradation. So how should we understand the benefits and costs of AI? Ezra Klein of the New York Times recently argued that we should be thinking about who controls the technology, in particular corporations and government, and whether their interests align with those of their users. When interests do not align, should we do anything about it? What should we do? And what does history say about how societies and governments have responded to technological disruptions, such as AI, for better or worse? So we're going to proceed as follows. Each of the panelists will make about 5 minutes of opening remarks. And I've asked Noah, Eileen, and Victor to touch on several subjects. First is, what is AI? And why is there so much recent attention and concern? How does AI benefit society currently, and what is its future potential? What are the potential threats and downsides that society should be concerned about? We'll then have a roundtable discussion. And if you have questions for the panelists, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can submit it using that option at any time. And it always helps if the questions that you submit are focused and brief, because I'm going to have to essentially ask those questions. And if I have to paraphrase them, then there's a good chance I'm going to miss your intent. Great. All right. So let's get started. Noah, so you're a professor in the Department of Computer Science who is on the leading edge of AI research. And you also frequently collaborate with social scientists. So you should be able to cross this bridge that we're facing here. Can you help us better understand what AI is, why it is such a thing, and the potential concerns of AI as someone who is highly knowledgeable about the field of AI research?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me. Great to see you all. Okay, so artificial intelligence, or AI, it's a term that we hear a lot these days. And as a researcher who works in AI, I tend to associate it most strongly with a community of researchers that are broadly interested in advancing computers' abilities to understand and use language or visual information, perhaps to reason, make predictions, and so on. This community is pretty old. It goes back to the 1950s as a research community, and recently it's also got a heavy footprint in the tech industry as well. Personally, I'm most interested in the language side of AI and in advancing machine learning techniques that work with language. I tend to prefer to say that I work on intelligence augmentation, offering people computational tools that will make us smarter, rather than simulating or cloning human intelligence. We already know how to do that. I think that's what most people kind of have in mind when they hear AI. They tend to think about sort of making something that's very human-like. Now that there are so many companies that are marketing products that use AI, the meaning of the term is drifting. So today, I think it's much more about branding and marketing than about specific technical claims. In general, what's considered AI seems to always be shifting towards things that are beyond current capabilities. So when you hear that something uses AI, you should really think of it like the prefix smart, like smartphones, or when a product is described as being made with love. It doesn't really mean anything. And AI experts don't really spend a whole lot of time drawing a line between what's AI and what isn't AI. So depending on your definition of intelligence, AI either totally doesn't exist at all, or it's been in widespread use for a very long time. Machine learning algorithms, for example, are used today in making all kinds of recommendations to consumers, detecting fraud, predicting the weather, automatically translating between languages, retrieving documents for you on the web, and many more. These things have been steadily improving over time, thanks to machine learning, thanks to new data, thanks to new algorithms. But the principles of current AI are not, in my view, fundamentally different from what got us these everyday tools. In my area of natural language processing, for example, rapid recent advances in language modeling, the core technology underneath the popular ChatGPT product, for example, have led to a lot of excitement about automatic generation of both natural language text and programming language code. These models are really good at producing fluent output, so much so that people have a hard time believing that that's all they are, fluency machines. They're more fluent than the language models we had 5 years ago because they were trained on lots more data and with some new algorithms, but they're really still just fluency machines. Exactly how these will be used most effectively remains to be seen, but there's no doubt that they're bringing us something very new and very exciting. So that leads me to concerns. The ease with which so many people can access these tools and the ease with which they can be misunderstood create a major concern for me that people will trust the tools too much or be fooled by what they produce. Language models, to take my favorite example again, do not model truth or respect or fairness. The language they produce will reflect back the language they see humans using in a noisy way, And we all know that the language humans use is not always true or respectful. This is why I think there's a huge amount of work to be done in integrating these fluency machines with other components and in empowering model users to curate the data that they are built on, rather than just having a few big tech companies control the design and creation of these models. But the biggest challenge, I think, is in what we might call AI literacy. We need an informed public and informed decision makers who do not look at new AI technologies with naive fear or with naive optimism, but rather have a basic grasp of what can be reasonably expected from them. The first thing I think everyone needs to understand is that despite the marketing hype, these technologies do not have agency or intelligence the way we think of people having. There are many other concerns, but I'll stop there now to give the others on the panel some time to talk too.
Great. Thanks, Noah. Eileen, you are a professor in the iSchool, Information School at the University of Washington, and specializing in, as I understand it, identifying problems with AI systems with the goal of improving those systems. Can you tell us more about the problems that you study and why they are important?
Sure. Noah gave a great overview of what artificial intelligence is, what state-of-the-art systems and applications are, what some of the benefits might be, and what some of the concerns are. And I particularly focused on understanding what the unexpected side effects of artificial intelligence systems might be. In particular, nowadays, we have many models that have been trained on large-scale sociocultural data. And accordingly, artificial intelligence systems learn the patterns in these large-scale data sets. And one of the patterns actually encodes implicit biases and associations of humans. And accordingly, since these models are learning the historical patterns in data sets, including injustices and biases, they tend to perpetuate these biases, and depending on the data set, which is usually the main signal that contains bias, at times they amplify bias. And accordingly, we see language vision or language vision multimodal models that manifest various social group related biases, such as racial bias, gender bias, ageism, sexuality-related associations, and any social group-related association that we can think of that have been documented, in particular in society and psychology. We see that these models are also learning these from large-scale data in particular. So that is one concern that we have, because we don't necessarily have proper regulation for AI at the moment. But if AI systems, or as AI systems are automating consequential decisions, for example, job candidate assessment, resume screening, healthcare decisions, resource allocation, and so on. And if the outcomes are potentially discriminatory, we need to somehow deal with these in various settings, but we have a complex problem. And law has been designed for human decision makers in particular. And accordingly, nowadays, law, regulation, and policy is catching up with AI to design approaches and mechanisms to audit these systems, to understand their impact on society. And fairness and bias is just one concern. In addition to these, we have privacy and security concerns, because large-scale data also tends to contain sensitive or private information from individuals that might be in the training data of these systems, and they leak when models are being used in certain settings. This also leads to copyright issues, and we have heard recent copyright court cases that are trying to deal with these. In addition to this, there are security concerns, because machine learning systems can be fooled or attacked in various ways not to perform as they are expected. For example, a smart car might not recognize its surroundings if it is attacked in one way or another, especially its computer vision system. Or we can think of many other application settings where unexpected behavior might be observed and create security and safety problems, in addition to privacy, security, copyright, and fairness issues. For example, right now, these models require a lot of computational resources to be trained, and in many cases, big technology companies have the resources to train these, in addition to a few nonprofit organizations. But that creates a bottleneck, and also the power dynamics shift when certain entities have access to these models, or they are the ones disseminating these models. We don't understand what kind of side effects might be embedded in these systems, what kind of agendas, including political philosophies, these systems might be perpetuating, especially when we cannot audit their algorithms or inspect their large-scale training sets. And there are ethical concerns here, and as well as policy concerns. Can we really open source the data sets which might contain sensitive information? We don't have clear standards and practices for these, but it's an active research area. And as these models require a lot of resources for training and a lot of data, this also raises concerns about sustainability and efficiency. Again, we have an active research area. How can we make these training processes more efficient and environmentally friendly? And these are some of the concerns that are actively being studied. But when we have language models that automatically summarize text for us, that write cover letters, or that can generate code from natural language, that also raises questions about how is education going to shift? How is this going to impact learning and cognition of future generations? How are these going to impact job displacement and automation? We understand that automation brings a lot of efficiency. It creates many new opportunities, exciting areas, for example, in arts, in artificial intelligence for social good, or human AI collaboration in particular, when we can outsource cognitively overloading tasks to artificial intelligence so that experts can perform better and enhance their knowledge. There are many opportunities, there are many concerns, and there are many open questions. And one of the exciting areas is that artificial intelligence is also creating new disciplines and areas, including computational social science, for example. Now we are able to study questions we weren't able to study, and all disciplines are used in artificial intelligence, as well as every sector in society. This is my brief overview of what concerns we have and what the opportunities are.
I think that was pretty good for 5 minutes. I do have one follow-up though. Would you mind walking us through an example of how an AI system is being used to do something where bias becomes a problem?
Sure. One simple example would be, if we're talking about ChatGPT and language models. These are amazing technologies that make information sharing possible across cultures and countries and language barriers. For example, machine translation. Now, information can easily be translated and then disseminated. People can communicate and learn and have access to more data. But at the same time, language models learn language from the patterns in the data set that tend to reflect societal statistics, and it might not be very accurate. As Noah mentioned, this can be noisy. And one example I'm going to give is, I was using one of these conversational agents the other day that attempts to mitigate bias in the system. But when I asked the conversational agent to translate the gender-neutral Turkish sentences, o bir doktor, o bir hemşire, meaning he or she is a doctor, he or she is a nurse, in the gender-neutral Turkish language, the outcomes in the other languages I speak, which are all gendered languages such as English, German, and Bulgarian, are consistently, he's a doctor, she's a nurse. Mm-hmm. And is this accurate? Or do we need to have more progress in natural language understanding, especially in case an ethical decision is being made, or which fairness notion should be applied in this case? That's why we have many open questions, as well as direct examples of impact of bias.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. Terrific. Victor, you are a political economist who studies economic innovations and their consequences. Presumably, other innovations have a lot to teach us about the impact of AI, both in terms of its future benefits and its future costs.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that every new technology is like a full employment act for experts such as Eileen and Noah, and also bloviators such as myself, where we could get together on panels like this and speculate about the future. And if you think about it, every new technology, including writing and the printing press and the telegraph and radio and television and the internet, during their respective rollouts, there's been a lot of fear, speculation, hope. And so every time one of these comes out, panels of so-called experts such as myself get to, I don't know, just muse about what might be in store here. I'm hoping that whatever I have to say is marginally better than ChatGPT. And if not, then I think that'll teach us something important as well. And one thing I'd say that's interesting is that Socrates, millennia after writing was introduced, would rail against writing as one of the most terrible technologies ever created because he feared that it made humans dumb and forgetful. And I have to say, I think he was correct in my case, because it's been taking me a very long time to complete my book manuscript on this topic. So I blame writing, and I think I might blame AI for some of that as we go here. Okay, fears about AI. There are several fears about AI. Noah and Eileen have discussed some of them. I think the primary fear is that it's a technology that is seemingly capable of handling any task that a typical person can do, and perhaps do it better. There's this idea that AI will become our new overlord and turn us into Soylent Green, like the movie The Matrix. But I'm not going to really touch on that as much as the other fear around pervasive job losses. And this is the idea that AI powered robots, for example, might replace every conceivable blue-collar job that involves transportation or warehousing or even janitorial services. Or there's an idea that in manufacturing, robots might assemble intricate components or work with delicate materials like textiles and displace people. Or worst of all, and gasp, AI may replace white-collar jobs such as this one that require strong communication skills and creative work such as writing and art. On the flip side, there's a lot of economic potential. I might get into this if there's questions asked about new goods and services, higher quality goods and services, lower prices for everything we might think of, including things we don't even understand yet or have not been created yet, better health and education outcomes, higher standards of living and higher wages and income, better environmental outcomes, and as the pie grows larger because of AI-powered economy, public good, social insurance, and redistribution as governments tax and spend some of the fruits of this. Okay, what about the fears about AI? I might get into this if questions are asked. I believe they're unfounded if you look at logic and history. AI and humans seem to complement each other, and AI augments humans. Our brains don't operate like AI deep learning models, so that means there's complementarity there. AI is only as good as the information you feed into it. AI completely lacks common sense. Instead, it just simply assigns weights to different factors based on prior experience or data. And AI needs a whole bunch of expensive computing power to acquire and process data, which is great, but we can use logic, association, and inference to fill in gaps, and we don't require as much data, and it's less expensive to us. So there's some comparative advantage differences there that means compatibility rather than substitution. Finally, we could use AI perhaps like ChatGPT for generic stuff, like whatever's on the web, but then customize it when there's not enough data on the web or it's the wrong kind of data. So our role perhaps could be to edit and hone the content and work generated by AI, and again, complement what it does. One example I might give is generative AI around images. It's really bad at relations between objects, so it requires human helpers to generate this type of art. If you think about the relationship between objects, if that's important, so it doesn't do everything. It's really bad at taking directions. Like, it's the humans that must master feeding it the script so it can generate the desired images, and that takes iteration and practice and human intuition. And it depends on the objects and the training data set, as Eileen discussed and Noah did as well. And these probably are acquired with permission and must respect copyright. So there's all these processes that humans are good at in terms of the transaction costs there. Also, the data sets are very limited and rated G, so they could be boring. And humans generate the stock footage needed to generate the images that the AI uses. So that's just one example. And during Q&A, maybe I can get into others about how humans, far from being replaced, are going to be, I believe, very compatible with the stuff AI does well.
Great, terrific. So I guess one of the questions, given your expertise, is if we look at past economic innovations and sort of, there are clearly benefits to be had, right? And for society as a whole and that sort of thing, but there are winners and losers in these systems. And so is there sort of any kind of historical insights into who the winners and losers tend to be from technological innovations of this kind? And related to that, how effective are governments, how effective at addressing the losers have governments historically been, in terms of potentially governments can compensate the losers from the benefits, but do they necessarily do that?
Sure. I would say first, to start off, AI is a general purpose technology, kind of like steam engines, electricity, and microprocessors were and are. And so it will usher in an industrial revolution just like those previous general purpose technologies did. And that is a very important thing to realize. It's a groundbreaking innovation that will be improved upon over time. It'll have many applications with the broad diffusion we tend to think. It'll spawn complementary knock-on innovations and impact the entire economy. So it's not like a narrow invention or something without far-reaching applications or that'll touch every aspect of our lives. And so therefore, I really do think, as you said very well, eloquently, we have to look at history in the prior industrial revolutions to think about efficiency in terms of the size of the pie and distribution in terms of the winners and losers, because production and society will be entirely reorganized if this looks anything like those prior general purpose technologies and those prior industrial revolutions. And the one thing I'd say for each of those industrial revolutions around steam, around electricity, around computers, there were fears about mass unemployment and terrible dystopian visions of work in the wake of these. One thing I'll say about the losers, historically, it has never come to pass that there's this mass displacement of workers. If anything, more people are alive ever, 8 billion, and more people are working. We have a very low unemployment rate in the US, so low that it's causing consternation at the Federal Reserve, for example. So if you think about the losers, there will be occupations that are very specific. So if you think about, for example, the telegraph during its heyday, there were clerks who mastered teletype machines and they're gone. Or if you think about before spreadsheets, there were X-Acto knife wielding experts that would cut Mylar sheets spread out across large tables before the advent of spreadsheets, and they're gone. Or layout jobs for folks in the magazine industry after desktop publishing was introduced, they're decimated. Or if you think of those magazines themselves, they've been replaced by websites, right? Leading to folks who lost their jobs in the magazine industry. So there are definite losers. There's entire industries that might lose traction or that might not exist. I like to think about the fact that the automobile industry destroyed millions of jobs in the horse breeding, horse feeding, and horse caring industry, especially cleaning up after horses, and that industry is destroyed. Horseshoe making has not recovered. And so therefore, there's definitely either occupations or entire industries that might be destroyed. But in terms of the winners, I think the good news for our country and Washington State and the University of Washington and people like ourselves that are white collar workers working in developed countries is that I believe that there'll be an incredible competitive advantage for folks that do intangible type stuff, folks in places with very strong intellectual property rights, folks that specialize in software, specialize in marketing, specialize in business services. And if that's the case in terms of the global system, I think our country, our state, our university, and the folks gathered around, this a virtual table right now will be fine. In terms of the blue collar jobs, that's more of an open question, and it's a very contingent on a bunch of different factors. But just looking at the big picture, I actually think that folks doing our kinds of work are going to be much more productive, do much better, and countries that are developed will be relative winners in this game.
Great, thank you. So I would like to remind the audience that if you have a question, there's the Q&A in the bottom there. You can click on that and enter a question. I'll get to questions in just a minute. I did want to follow up with both Noah and Eileen about privacy. And I guess what I'm interested in is, Eileen mentioned that there are privacy concerns in terms of data. Where do these systems get their data, right? And how intrusive are they? And Victor sort of seemed to suggest that the data that they use is pretty limited, but we also hear that your clicks and everything you do on the internet is being commodified by someone. So I'm curious about what you know about the amount of information that these systems have about us as users.
Well, one thing to remember about any service you use on the internet is that if you can't tell what's being bought and sold, it's you, right? And so there's a tremendous amount, as you say, of data being collected. What exactly is getting used in what kinds of models and by whom? This is a complicated question, right? AI, I want to respond to one thing Victor said about AI being like this general solution. I don't think of it that way. As a researcher in AI, I know it's very commonplace for people to talk about AI as general solutions to many problems. I know that's a very popular frame. But it is not one thing. It is many, many different things. The tools that people use for predicting the weather do not have much in common with the tools people use for making recommendations or the tools people use to write language. There may be a tendency towards more sharing of techniques across these things. The transformer network that was developed in NLP for machine translation has become much more widely used. There's some commonality. You could argue that it's increasing, but I think it's not helpful to think of AI as general purpose solutions to all kinds of things. I think that is a narrative that is being put forward by some of the marketing departments of some of the big companies to convince us that big changes are coming. But I would argue that a lot of the changes are well underway already. I think if you want to talk about work dystopias, you don't have to look much farther than working for a large company as a middle person in 21st century America. It's already pretty dystopic for a lot of people, I think. And that's in part because of the technology, which, depending on your definition, includes AI or doesn't. Sorry, I'm getting off track. Eileen, you should go ahead.
Sure, I can give some examples from the current transformers that are dominating the field. For example, to train language models or language vision models, all kinds of language image pairs are automatically collected from the entire internet by automating the process based on some kind of hierarchical structure, so that all concepts in language and objects in the vision domain can be collected to train these models. And this automation process is quite efficient, But at the same time, since it's efficient and collecting large-scale data, it doesn't make it possible to carefully or accurately inspect which data point can be collected and can end up in the training set of a model. And there are many data points that are copyrighted from, for example, Hollywood, Disney, and whatnot, or creative artworks that belong to artists end up in these data sets. Code samples that are copyrighted end up in these models. Moreover, private sensitive information that might be deleted by now, but was there at the time of collection, end up in these data sets. And this raises concerns about the right to be forgotten as well. And there are many other ethical concerns about what kind of data is disseminated on the internet based on the data economy, because certain things can be monetized more easily, and accordingly the representation of those samples are or have higher frequency. And there are many ethical concerns surrounding these issues about privacy, copyright, consent of individuals, because as Noah mentioned, our data is being used to train all kinds of machine learning models, and we do not necessarily know how they are being used, why they are being used, but then they end up in these millions of dollars of worth AI systems that are being commercialized with our data. And there are many complex issues here. And essentially, when, for example, generative AI is used to generate simple things, at times it might end up leaking direct, sensitive, personally identifiable even information from individuals. And we don't necessarily know if these types of information is in the training sets, because we don't get to inspect them if they're not open source, or if they are very large scale and open source. How do we analyze the large scale data set is another open question. We have many open questions.
To add to that, when you use ChatGPT, you can be damn sure they're saving your data and they're using it to create an even bigger gap between the data they can use for the next model and what everybody else has.
Great, thanks. I'm gonna, we have quite a few questions here, so let's take a look. I work with Linux nonprofit Open Voice Network. Our focus is making conversational AI worthy of user trust. The 2023 spring bloom of some chatbots is a boon for awareness, but a challenge, as you mentioned. Explain what it is. Oh, this is not a question. Okay.
I think this was a follow-up. This person asked a question, which I
Okay.
answered in the chat, and then there were a couple. I'll dismiss the ones that I know aren't questions. I've been
Okay.
following along.
Great. Let's see. Could the panelists please comment on how the institutional values of organizations like OpenAI impact what AI chatbots like ChatGPT will and won't talk about? What's the upshot of that? You want to give that a shot, Noah?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know what the institutional values of an organization like OpenAI really are, apart from, you know, shareholder value. That's what that's my limited understanding of the capitalist world, is that that's what corporations do. So, you know, anything that they can do to protect that, they're going to do. It's pretty clear that there are some sort of filters and guardrails that have been put on to try to prevent ChatGPT from being offensive, but people find ways to work around them when they really want to. So I think there's at least a little bit of kind of hacking going on top of the model. You're not being exposed to the model without anything between you and its predictions at all. But I think maybe the more relevant thing is not what the chatbot will and won't talk about, but rather what the company will and won't talk about. And there are many open questions in the research community about how this model was built, what went into it, what it cost, what its size is. You know, there's all this talk about large language models, but many of us suspect, given the cost of deploying a massive model, that this one is not actually the biggest model, or it's been distilled in some way, which is a technical term for taking a big model and making it into a little one. But they haven't told us much about the data. The full process is, you know, very opaque, and you know, it's probably being updated regularly. It's you know, I emphasize in my classes not to think about it as you know, a scientific experiment. This is basically a product that's been built, and just like any other proprietary product that's been built by a big tech company, like Google, the Google search engine, unless you're on the inside, you really don't know, and you're not likely to, because these are secrets that they want to protect.
Thanks, Noah. So there are a couple of questions here that are related. What governmental oversight policies should be in place to protect the public from erroneous and harmful AI decision-making applications? And considering AI's failures and shortcomings, who can be held accountable for those failures, right? Who should, both in terms of who should we be focused on in terms of addressing these issues? And I realize that none of you are government policy experts, but sure, take a swing at it. Eileen, do you want to try that one?
Sure, I would be happy to provide some information. There are some efforts in this space by the White House, Congress, the National Science Foundation, and so on. For example, Congress tasked the National Institute for Standards and Technology to come up with an AI risk management framework so that we can contribute to trustworthy artificial intelligence by developing standards and practices and disseminating these in a science-driven way. And accordingly, they have been working in this domain for a few years now, investigating various issues about concerns with AI and improving our understanding in this field and communicating this between stakeholders, different government agencies or scientists and corporations and so on. That is one effort. On the other hand, there are some policy efforts based on, again, science-driven policy making. Once regulators understand how artificial intelligence systems work better, and once scientists can translate and communicate the issues in a way that different disciplines and regulators and policymakers can understand these, they have been working on coming up with policies, and there have been certain attempts and bills and so on. We know that, for example, Europe is a bit ahead compared to the United States based on AI and data privacy regulation. In addition to that, now many companies, corporations are also starting fairness and ethics groups about, for example, human-centered artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence safety and so on, to understand how they can develop institutional policies around these, which are much more opaque because these are, again, corporations. There are many efforts. Policy takes longer. The technology is already out there and it's causing direct impact. It is shaping society, affecting society. And in the meantime, policy is trying to catch up, but there is progress.
Great, thank you. So here's a question for anyone, maybe perhaps Victor. What challenges do current and/or potential AI applications pose for liberal democracy? How might AI change society-state relations? And also, could you speak to the geopolitical implications of AI?
Wow, that is a tall order, John. Liberal democracy. You know, my take on these issues is to be a contrarian and to try to find the silver lining always, because I think there is a lot of doomsday thinking about AI when it comes to, I don't know, politics and the like, in terms of misinformation or in terms of surveillance or in terms of, bad actors being able to amplify whatever nefarious plots that they are hatching. But one thing it might do is it might improve healthcare, and it might improve education, and it might improve legal services. It might reduce the costs of these things. Again, thinking about comparative advantage, it could be that educators such as myself will be much better at the last mile, so to speak. Like maybe we'll get ChatGPT to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to writing a research paper or even teaching. And then we can spend a lot more time reflecting or a lot more time teaching in a better way. So again, this goes to the complementarity issue. Like if I can spend most of my time thinking about the ethics of something or the deeper meaning of something or its connections with other things, rather than, I don't know, spending an inordinate amount of time putting together citation lists or trying to learn a literature or several literatures, then maybe I'll improve the educational experience and therefore civics. If you think of healthcare, AI promises to transform healthcare by making it much cheaper to access, let's say in the countryside, a surgeon remotely or a doctor remotely, therefore improving the healthcare of our fellow citizens in rural areas or in developing countries. And that could be really good for democracy, because if you're not focused on health as much, you have more time to think and to protest and to form part of a political party and to become civically engaged. When it comes to legal services, I think my wife is a lawyer, so we talk a lot about what can be automated and what can be shifted towards the higher value use of a legal mind. And if AI could do a lot of the dirty work that lawyers do with discovery or do with crafting emails even, because a lot of their time is spent with client services in a very tedious way. Or to go back to citations, they're so punctilious about citations and the citing things so that judges don't freak out. So if she could have the machines do that, she could spend more time doing pro bono work or thinking about legal strategies that might benefit different clients. So those are three areas where AI could reduce the costs, improve the products, help more people, level the playing field with lower cost services for more people in different places, and make democracy better. So there's again, a positive spin on it.
Great. So I'm going to push back on the negative part of it, or at least one criticism. So one of the concerns about AI is that well, let me just say it's not necessarily just AI, but information systems where it becomes more difficult to distinguish fact from fiction, right? And so in the case of deep fakes, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sorry for stuttering a little bit here, but if you think about, right, in recent elections, right, and the disinformation and misinformation that's been distributed, right, and the impact that it's had on people's understanding of what happens in politics and that sort of thing, those concerns, might arguably be accentuated, right, by increasingly sophisticated language systems where it's becomes even more difficult to tell what's true and what's not true to the extent.
Absolutely. But I'd go back to history. So the fascists used radio and art to create propaganda and to try to indoctrinate people into bad things, right? And at the, radio was pretty new and it was scary. And people said, one option is to ban the radio because you can propagandize and spread lies and misinformation. In fact, in the Rwandan Civil War, the Tutus if James was here, he could tell me, Hutus and Tutsis, right? They used radio, so a relatively old technology by 1994, to spread lies and misinformation and the like. Political economy teaches us that under those scenarios, there is a strong incentive politically and economically to find ways to credentialize information. And one way to do that is better screening, and another way to do that is better signaling. So you could imagine that intermediaries might arise on the scene to create political and economic institutions and markets that could credentialize information. Maybe you could use blockchain, for example, blockchain technology that's where you could encrypt the truth or something like that. And you could have the rise of new intellectuals or a new academic or a new elite that brokers the information. And as long as there's trust, which is more important than technology, that could work to help solve the problem. And in fact, AI maybe could be harnessed to improve that. I think the deeper issue there is lack of trust or a context in which misinformation thrives, whatever the technology that delivers it. So that's about civic education. That's about trust in institutions, trust in each other, trust in politicians. Whether AI will exacerbate polarization and deep distrust is a separate issue, but I think pushing along the lines of civic education, as long as we can improve that and improve trust, then we shouldn't fear the technology, because we'll find innovative ways, both in the private sector or even in the public sphere, to get ahead of it. So that doesn't mean we can fall asleep at the switch or be lazy about it. We have to keep up, but we have been able to keep up in the past. Like I said, Socrates mistrust writing because he feared without an oral tradition, democracy would die in ancient Athens. And so we could rail against writing, or we could find a way to make writing more legible, or to increase literacy, to increase civic literacy, economic literacy, political literacy. And the same thing with AI, we could increase AI literacy, for example.
Thanks, Victor. Noah, did you want to weigh in on this?
Remind me what the question was.
Sort of thinking about the impact of these technological innovations on liberal democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have anything smart to say about this. I guess I'm not as optimistic, just based on recent technology advances and their impact on liberal democracy and society. So, is Twitter AI? I don't know. I mean, there's a recommendation algorithm in there, and to some extent, that recommendation algorithm is part of influencing very heavily what a lot of people see every day, right? And I think there was much discussion when a certain former U.S. president was removed from the platform, right, about the effects that would have. If Twitter is AI, then that doesn't bode well. I don't think Twitter has had any positive benefits for liberal democracy. We could debate that, but I think it could have been designed better. That particular design was not, it led us in a very particular direction. I think the design choices that are made when people create these systems do have an effect on people and what people do and how people interact with each other, especially during a pandemic when they mediate ever more of the conversation, right? Think about the design of the platform we're using right now. Zoom allows people to turn their cameras off. That affects, I don't know, I can see some of the people in the conversation. I can't see all of them. I don't know who's really here. There's all kinds of little design decisions that affect everything. And we never get to do controlled experiments. I'm a scientist. I want to see controlled experiments before I draw these conclusions. And we never get to do controlled experiments. We only get to observe what happens. And only part of what happens, because OpenAI won't share all the details, right? And Zoom doesn't share all the details. So I hesitate to make cause, as John knows, as a computer scientist, I hesitate to make claims about cause and effect. But I am not as optimistic as others, I think, because I think we live in a society that's reluctant to try to understand the details, that prefers an exciting story to the basic facts about what an AI model really is. And we don't want to hear about the limitations. We want to hear about how we won't have to write essays anymore,
or great essays for that matter,
or maybe great essays.
Okay, and so you were talking about sort of the design decisions that are being made, and I'm going to ask Eileen a question essentially about looking inside of these companies that are are building these systems, right? If we're concerned about bias and that sort of thing, to what extent are these companies attentive to these issues and promoting equity and diversity within their companies in order to make their systems be more representative?
This is a great question, and I wish I had an answer for you or a complete answer. These companies apparently have been making some efforts, some attempts at having more people involved, both in the design and test process. For example, every now and then, AI system developing companies reach out to academics, researchers, students to get some of their products tested in the beta stage to understand what the problems might be, especially problems that might impact society, such as bias, toxic outputs, and problematic content that raises ethical or policy concerns. But I am not sure if there are structured efforts in this case about dealing with impact on society. And since these corporations are also black boxes, similar to their products, and they are not regulated, we don't exactly know what is going on, but we know that they have to follow regulation and policy. And in the AI space, we don't necessarily have that yet, but things are going to change soon. There'll be more transparency. There'll be more opportunities for audits. We are not there yet, and we are only able to study whatever they provide to us. And Noah made a great point about being a scientist. We need controlled settings. We need all the data points, all the inputs, all the algorithms, all the parameters and hyperparameters to understand what might be going on here, to measure the impact of these products on society and to change them in ways so that they won't be harmful, or they can be used for human AI collaboration or to enhance certain tasks. But we are not there yet, and corporations are trying to implement certain types of solutions in their processes, such as attempting to mitigate bias or having a set of workers involved in the process to provide some data for reinforcement learning to mitigate problematic content. And recently we found out that some of those workers come from the global south. They have not been paid much, and they provide their own values and perspectives for the reinforcement learning process, for example. Or we know that user input is also taken into account. So whenever we use these systems, we also provide some kind of an input, but we don't necessarily understand how exactly these are being used. And moreover, we don't know if stakeholders are involved in the design processes. For example, a member of a minority group, if they are involved in the process, based on their lived experience, they might have better ideas about what kind of biases and problems to expect when the system is used to make decisions about them, or to be used in a context where their community is familiar with. And they can develop test and design strategies for their particular social group. But in many cases, they are not involved in the design process. Stakeholders are not involved. That also creates a problem. And it is a very complex cycle. The artificial intelligence pipeline is quite complex. There is data collection. Who collects the data? Who decides what kind of data will be collected? How is it going to be processed? How is the system going to be designed? And what is the construct of the system? What kind of process is it trying to automate? Is that process even a valid process? Is it a valid construct? For example, there are some systems that automate criminality prediction from processing faces and mugshots. That is not even a valid construct. We cannot predict criminality from people's faces. There is no causal signal there. And we don't really know what kind of proprietary products are being developed and then sold. Then governments are using these, startups are using these, researchers, students, the public, entrepreneurs, everyone is using these, but the processes are quite opaque. And whenever there is a problem, especially, for example, in the pre-trained models, as these are being used by millions of people for all kinds of purposes, including monetizing or commercializing them, all kinds of side effects also propagate, and it is quite complex, and we cannot study it properly because we don't have access to all the elements in these systems, and we try our best to kind of reverse engineer the process so that we can have significant signals that show what might be going on here, and accordingly policy gets informed as well.
And so do you think this is going to change then? Do you think that through regulation, we're going to have more opportunities to look inside the black box?
This has to change because we are able to show that in certain cases, these systems are discriminating certain groups or individuals. And when we are able to show that, law and policy needs to intervene, because in our society, these are domains that are well regulated, and there are other well regulated domains, for example, healthcare decisions and trials in healthcare products and so on. Those could be some examples. Moreover, we were just discussing how these systems affect politics or liberal democracy. We know that language has an impact on individuals' cognition, and when language is used, and it has been used for propaganda, and when social media is also taken a part in the dissemination of propaganda, we understand that something has to be regulated here, because malicious parties, bad actors, or nation states can get involved and at scale disseminate their propaganda by using, for example, language models that are tuned for certain values, certain associations, certain agendas. And if we don't have content moderation for these types of things on platforms such as Twitter that have an impact on individuals' decisions and understanding of the world, then we will have many other complex problems. And I guess in these cases, governments will intervene and try to come up with solutions, because these are large-scale problems that not just affect individuals, but societies and states.
Thank you. So here's another question I think is a great question, but I'm not sure that it can be answered. In what ways can AI help combat misinformation? Could we turn AI on itself to identify when it's not working well?
So I think there's certainly work on this, content analysis techniques that through a combination of looking at what's being said and patterns of who's saying what, try to detect and head these things off. And so I think, there's certainly, if it can be used on one side, it can probably be used on the other. And so we may already be, I don't follow this area closely, but there may already be kind of a growing arms race between, people out in the dark who are trying to exploit models to produce misinformation and spread it, and people who are trying to combat that. So I think sure, that's a laudable use, and you can certainly find research papers on the topic.
Yeah, so that's what Victor says should happen ideally, right? That we'll get pushback. Thank you. So Article 1, Section 7 of the Washington State Constitution contains an express right of privacy for Washington citizens. What unique concerns might this raise in terms of AI-related data privacy collection of Washingtonians, right? So if we have this right to privacy and AI systems are collecting data on us, are those systems in violation of Washington state law? And is that something that
So I
between
would
these-
point to a subtle distinction between what we're calling AI and the collection of the data. Like by most definitions, it's not really AI until you start analyzing the data and building models or making inferences from it. So I suspect that this is sort of orthogonal to questions about AI. It's really about what companies do with data they collect about you and what they're allowed to do. I can't answer that question because I'm a computer scientist, but I wouldn't wrap that up in AI. I think it's a very good question. I mean, I'm super annoyed at all the advertising I get in my life, and wish that the state of Washington would stamp it out completely. But I don't think it has to do with AI. I think the AI is about the targeting and the selection of how that data gets used.
That's a fair response. Eileen, do you have any thoughts about sort of the liability that these companies have with respect to state laws in terms of sharing data?
I am not necessarily an expert in law, but for many of these companies or applications, web pages that collect our data, they have their policies, and their policies end up determining if they are in conflict with state laws. Moreover, we are in Washington state, but when we use an AI application that somehow makes use of our data, or we are served content by an AI system, it usually passes not just many states and many countries. So the policy is then not just relevant for Washington state, but it becomes a complex problem where many countries' policies get involved about how that data is being used. And if it's in conflict with anything, it is a quite complex problem, because analyzing the problems across different policies is not trivial. Moreover, when users are using certain applications, we usually somewhere in the process give our consent to our data being used. Otherwise, we don't really even get access to that system. So in these processes, I am not sure how Washington law or policy has an impact on individual users, but we have amazing law professors that focus on these types of questions at the University of Washington. For example, Ryan Kalo, he might have much better answers for you if you were to talk to him.
Thank you. So one of the questions I think, and I can, anyone can answer it, but maybe Victor would be the person to respond is, so I'm a current college student and I'm thinking about careers. What should I think, what should I be thinking about moving forward, and how are these developments in technology likely to impact my job opportunities? I realize you're not a career advisor, Victor, but it seems like an interesting question worth exploring.
Maybe I should be, though. This might launch me into a new career path, John, so who knows? We're all on tenterhooks, waiting to see what kind of sage advice I can dole out. One really coarse way to think about it, a very basic way to think about it, would be, what do humans have a comparative advantage in versus the machines? So what comes cheaper to human beings? I would say knowledge and wisdom is our domain, and the AI's domain is information or data. Knowledge and wisdom is about the humanistic liberal arts, so to speak, in a sense. It's like contemplation and exposure to many sources and critical thinking and making connections between seemingly disparate ideas. I think we have an insuperable advantage over AI, at least for the moment, in those domains. So anything where there's reflection, where there's ethics, where there's compassion and intuition and empathy, the softer skills, so to speak, I don't really see AI really eating our lunch in that domain. When it comes to computer science and the natural sciences and the like, again, as new technologies have been introduced, it's made folks in those domains more productive, more efficient, able to specialize in things humans do well. Like, for example, not having to do so many raw calculations, if you will, if you had to run a regression, let's say conduct a statistical analysis. So you can think about not the raw calculations, but more about the theoretical principles that go into it, or maybe measurement issues, or maybe causal inference issues. So having a good research design rather than having to invert matrices, so to speak, or do a bunch of differential equations, high-level calculus. So I don't really have anything innovative to say except use the technology, figure out what it's good at and what you're good at, and in synergy, you will co-evolve the way we always have with, I have to go back to it, I will respectfully disagree with Noah, general purpose technologies going back to the steam engine or electricity or the microprocessor, right? Things that complement what we're good at or augment what we're good at. So I actually don't see huge radical differences in what one should do, except for, as I said before, there are historical examples of certain occupations that are so specific and so connected to old technologies that they probably will go by the wayside. And we could have a conversation offline about what those might be. But again, looking back at history, I think those are very few. And what's exciting is that if we really specialize in what we do good as humans, there are all these unknown careers that are about to open up. Things we couldn't even imagine, maybe using virtual reality to cut across distances and help people in the developing world, reach their potential more readily. Those are things I'm really excited about. Or as I mentioned before, using remote surgery or remote education or remote legal services. So I just think, keep studying, keep working hard. Don't be afraid of the technology. Take a deep breath and just kind of co-evolve and see how the chips might fall.
Thanks. Noah.
Yeah, so I do give career advice every day. I mentor or manage about 40 people. And, AI researchers also get worried about, being put out of business by the AIs. And then, we talk ourselves down because we realize that these things aren't even close to doing what humans do every day. They don't think. They just don't. We use these words like intelligence. We use words like reason because we don't have better metaphors, but they don't do the things that you do every day. They do not understand language. The most basic things that you do without even thinking about it, these machines don't do. So I'm going to turn back. So my position is the same. The world has not fundamentally changed. And I'm going to go back to the advice that my father gave me, which is the job you're going to have at the end of your career doesn't even exist yet. Fields and jobs, they do become obsolete. And so what you have to focus on, what everybody has to focus on, I don't care if you're a CS major, a political science major, you have to be, focused on the things that you can control, keep learning, keep developing, don't get comfortable, and learn to live with the fact that we can't really predict the future. I think, Victor's advice to use the tools is absolutely fine, but I would discourage anyone from thinking that a good career move is to become like a technician that operates an AI system of any kind, because these things change very quickly. Developing a basic grasp of how they work, what they do, without necessarily being able to build them yourself, that's probably useful. I think that's what I would call AI literacy. But having a fundamental understanding of something that actually matters to society, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. There's plenty to do.
Thanks, Noah. Eileen, did you have anything to add to this subject?
Sure. I can add one thing that was related to the first points I shared with all of you about how education is going to change, how we have many opportunities now, and how AI can be used to enhance, for example, creativity in certain cases. First of all, I would say that for career advice, do what you are the most passionate about. Do what makes you the happiest when you wake up, because if you focus on what you like, then you will be motivated to study it, to understand it better, and to do something about it. And as you enjoy this process, you will get to a point where you will end up using the most advanced tools or knowledge that is out there in that domain. And artificial intelligence might as well play a role in it, because now it is in almost every discipline, if not in every discipline. So do whatever you like the most, and as long as you put in the work and you think that you're doing the right thing with a longer term goal, things will be okay.
Great, thank you. I think this is actually a good place to end it. So on a positive note, pursue your dreams and you will succeed. I think that's really great advice. So I'd like to thank our panelists. It's been terrific. And also our IT specialist, Steve Dunn, as well as the students representing Pi Sigma Alpha. A recording of this event will be available on the UW Political Science YouTube page in a few days. And then we'll be sending out more information about our spring quarter event in a few weeks. And in the meantime, have a nice evening and we wish you the best. Thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Noah and Eileen. That was really nice. I learned a lot from you guys. Thank you. Thanks, John.